So part B, number 3 on the constructed response. Here's the solution. Here's how you would solve it. The given equation, let me remind you, looked like this. Sorry, it's not right now. So the given equation was P of B equals -5B squared plus 395B minus 800. And it had like a description. You need to know how to read it and figure out what variable represents what thing that they're comparing. What does the P of D stand for on that one? P of D. I don't want to scroll up because then I'll have to erase my other word for part A. So, can you guys read it on your constructed response practice test? What does the output represent? What would go on my y-axis if I graphed it? Well, they're both represented in dollars, so what would the y-axis tell me? Profit. So P of D, my y-axis of whatever situation is profit in dollars, of course. And then what does the D itself represent? And dollars of what? Like in relation to what? Because both are in dollars. Okay, no, it's not each weekend. The D itself, reread the little ticket costs. D is ticket cost in dollars, of course, both are in dollars. That's why I don't want to just put dollars here. Because that's what you need to figure out in order to determine what you need to plug in and where you need to plug it in. So if I want to know, would the theater make a profit? And then what that profit is, that is what I'm trying to figure out. It should be like something equal to my output, and that would give me my profit. It said if they sold their tickets at a price of $48 each. So that's my ticket cost. That's what needs to get plugged in for the D. That's why using function notation, anywhere that there was a D, I plugged in the 48. Does that part make sense? Okay. So that's me plugging it in, knowing where to plug it in, whether an output or an input. The ticket cost is an input. That determines my profit. I use the calculator for this whole right side. One mistake I've seen people do is they forget to square it. So let me just remind you. Whenever you plug into a formula, you always use parentheses. Write it exactly how it looks on your paper. So -5 times 48 in parentheses squared plus 395 times 48 minus 800 gives me an answer that is not 0 and that is not negative. So when it asks me, would the theater make a profit? You would say yes. And the profit is $6,640 when the tickets cost $48. Does that make sense? That's just a function notation problem. Questions on that one? Questions on any others? Christina? Okay, part A of this question. So let me cover this. So we are writing and solving an equation to find the prices at which the theater would earn $0 in profit from the comedy show each weekend. So compare that to when we did part B, right, where we talked about ticket price and profit. If I want to know at what price the profit would be 0, where do I need to plug in that 0? The profit area, and not like just where the B is. That whole like output, you wanna know when that's 0. So I know like function notation can be confusing. The P of D together is my output. The P of D together is my profit. So if I wanna know when that's 0, I need to put a 0 for that whole thing, not just for the D. And that would be me making an equation. That gives you some of the points. I know you could do this by graphing, but it says to show your reasoning. So here's how you can show your reasoning that I think would be pretty easy. I'm not making you memorize your quadratic formula. That will be on the screen when you test. So to show your reasoning now, you will just need to identify your A, B, and C. So let's see, table 5. Can you tell me what my A is in this one? Good. Table 6, will you tell me what my B is? Good, and table 1, will you tell me what my C is? Good. Definitely another common mistake is people forgetting, like, if it's negative, to put a negative. Normally, we don't put a plus when it's positive, but, you know, don't forget, you always keep the sign that's in front of each term. If you don't know where A, B, and C, A, B, and C, if you don't know where they come from your standard form when it's set equal to 0. So then in this case, I identify my A, B, and C. I would have my quadratic formula on the screen. And all I have to do is plug in. Anytime you plug in, use parentheses, that would be reasoning enough. If you just did that, because I know the rest you could do in your calculator. But typically I would simplify some of it. And that's what it would look like here, me simplifying some of it. Like the 2 times -5 is becoming -395. What's under the square root, I would absolutely not even try to do myself, even as a math teacher. I would just use the calculator. So let's show what that looks like. So I always recommend what's under the square root symbol, put that in the calculator. These parentheses. And what's under the square root symbol is a big number. It's definitely not something that I want to like simplify the radical for. And for this problem, since we're talking about how much a ticket costs, we're allowed to have decimals when we're talking about dollars, right? So we would just round it to 2 decimal spots. But this is what's under the square root symbol. So I wrote that here, me simplifying some of it. And then I would put this in my calculator. So I would do the fraction bar, -395 plus the square root of that big number, 140,025 over -10. Now, this is a plus or minus right here. Normally you have 2 solutions for quadratics. Sometimes one of the solutions doesn't make sense, like I can't have $-. So if on the test, it doesn't make sense, one of the answers, then that can be negligible for that real world situation. $2.08, although it would be like a really cheap ticket, it's still like possible. So that's in my answer. The other answer I get from changing that plus to a minus right here. Like that. The plus or minus was right in front of the square root symbol. That's how I get my other answer of $76.92. At both of those X values, would the profit be 0? Questions on that? So that's how you can solve that. or something similar, similar situation. Riley? Number two on the constructed response. So that one, I think it's actually really easy. It's create an expression in factor form. So remember, factor form looks something like this. Usually with like an X as the first part. But you're creating an expression in factor form that would be equivalent to x squared minus bx minus 48. So think about how we would factor a trinomial. Normally we look for a GCF first, but the coefficient in front of the x squared is 1, so no GCF. Then you would set up your diamond and factor using the diamond method. So what would go on top of my diamond? What would go on the bottom? So they didn't fill in a number, but it looks like they want whatever number does go down here to be negative. And we know that the way that these diamonds work, it kind of makes it like a puzzle. We're looking for what multiplies to the top and adds to the bottom. So whatever two numbers I pick that multiply to negative 48, because there's a few different options, they have to add to the negative. So give me some numbers that multiply to negative 48. Okay, I heard -6 and 8. Do these add to a negative? No, but 16. So if I do it like this, that could be a potential answer where I have x plus 6 and x minus 8. And there are other answers you can have. So like, Jude, what did you say? -12 and 4. Those multiply to negative 48, they add to a negative number, don't they? So then another possible answer I could have is x minus 12, x plus 4. Factor form. Any others? So like 1 times 48, which one would have to be negative if it adds to a negative? So 1 times 48, which one would have to be negative to add to negative? So then another one I can have is x minus 48, x plus 1. So it has to multiply to a negative, add to a negative, and it has to multiply to this number. There's probably even others, but we can stop there. Other questions from any parts of the study guide? On another one? Another one? Okay. So So 1C, each part of number 1 can be looked at separately, so I don't think I need to go through A and B if no one has questions on A and B. So part C, it says, explain why dividing each side of 2x squared equals 8x by 2x is not a reliable way to solve the equation. So let's figure that out. Let's try it. See why it's not reliable. If I have 2x squared equal to 8x, and I divide both sides by 2x, we've said before that you could really do whatever you want to both sides of the equal sign as long as you do it to both sides. As long as you do it to both sides, it'll stay equal. So then for what cancels out, if you have the same thing on top and bottom of a fraction, it'll cancel. So like 2 over 2 cancels to 1. Over here, this x over x cancels, and you can simplify the rest. What's x squared divided by x? plus 8 divided by 2. So that gives me a solution. Why is that not a reliable way? Riley? I mean, I divided it from both sides. You can do whatever you want as long as you do both sides of the equal sign. It did let me isolate an X. Why is that not a reliable way though? What's wrong with me just getting X equals 4 that way? You guys notice, like, I see a bunch of you clearly not paying attention, not caring. Like, I don't care about your grade either. You wanna fail, that's totally fine with me. I'm not gonna waste my energy waking you up, telling you to pay attention, telling you to stop your little game, like, that is entirely on you. I've told you so many times, like, how important this test is, and I have like 3 people listening. So, I don't know, like, if you have a 59.4, I'm not bumping you to the. You could either pay for summer school or take it again. Like, I'm not doing you any favors, especially if you're like sleeping, playing games, not paying attention. I absolutely will not do you any favors. So, back to this. Why is this not reliable? Those of you that did actually do it and didn't just like copy off of someone else. I had people that had answers to it when they showed it to me. So why is this not a reliable way to solve the equation? It only gives one solution. How do I get both solutions? So, how do I get both solutions? How do you know there's even another one? Right? Like, my other answer is, I don't like to know. Not sure what you mean by that. So those of you that said it only gives one solution, how do you know there's another solution? What's the way that I can check that there's more than one solution? Well, if I do that, that proves that this is correct. But there are 2 solutions. How can I know what the other one is? How can I actually solve it? Okay. So then the factor, what form does it need to be in? So that would be for completing the square. If I want to solve it by factoring, what form does it need to be in? Close. Okay, so plus C equals 0 is how you can actually solve it. You could do that with quadratic formula or factoring. For completing the square, you can't do that with this, because A is not one, and you guys don't know how to do it. So quadratic formula or factoring, your choice. But if you did the first two parts of this question, you would have already solved it by factoring. When it says solve it by rewriting it, how do I rewrite it? Like, how do I make this side equal to 0? Subtract 8x, whatever I do on one side of the equal sign. So then I have 2x squared minus 8x equals 0. You could do quadratic formula, but again, I just said by rewriting. So when you factor, you always check for what first? Sorry, did I hear it? A GCF. Which one GCF between 2 and 8? And then is there a GCF between the variables? Do they both have an X? Yeah. So then yes, there is. And the rule is that you take the smallest amount. So between x squared and x to the first power, you can just take out x to the first power. This is my GCF. It'll go outside parentheses. Inside parentheses is what I get from dividing each term by my GCF. So I have 2 over 2 that cancels, x over x that cancels over here, which again, we did that over here. Similar at least. But x squared divided by x is x. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. And it's set equal to 0. So this solution we get from figuring out what x has to be to make that factor 0. This other factor, because normally we multiply this by that. What does x have to be to make this side 0? What times 2 will give me 0? So my two solutions are x equals 0 and x equals 4. So that's why I see that way that they're doing it is unreliable, because it only gives me the one solution. So yes, you have to know how to find both in part B. Questions on that? What property is it when we factor and it's set equal to 0? What do we call that property? Like, why can we solve it this way? Setting each factor equal to 0 and solving. The zero product property. Might want to mention that in part A. When it says to solve this, maybe we wrote it as this. So standard form to factor form. Explain how rewriting this equation in factor form enables her to solve the equation. Basically zero product property. When I multiply to get 0, one of the factors must be 0. And it can be either one. Okay, other questions? Might have time depending on how long it is. No one asked on the puzzle piece, so does that mean that's good? So later I will post the key to this, so stay tuned for that later in the school review, so you can check your answers. When I checked it earlier, it was just for completion, right? And yet I still had a lot of people not like have this done, but when we're going over it, they still didn't even like bother to write it down. So again, that just really tells me like not to do you any pages when it comes to your thing.